so nice to see some familiar and unfamiliar names here. I'm Jen Jensen. I'm the director of the Edith Orlando Virtual Learning Center, but I am also a MET instructor. I'm in the Master of Educational Technology program for some of those who don't know what that is, who have joined us today. And I am so delighted to be hosting James to give a Twine workshop. And before I ask him to introduce himself and just jump right in, I would like to start by acknowledging that even as we're virtual, UBC it resides on the traditional, ancestral, unceded territories of the Musqueam people. James, over to you.
All right, thank you, Jen. Hi, everyone. Great to see so many people here. My name is James Martin. I'm a teacher in the Burnaby School District, and I recently completed UBC's Master of Educational Technology program. I see a few familiar faces here from some of my fellow students from that. So hi, everyone. I really got into this Twine thing. I was introduced to it by some other students, actually, in a group project in the MET program. And then during a class that I took with Jen, the educational video games course, I dove deep into it. And I've been kind of swimming in the Twine world ever since. I've continued to work on a number of projects using Twine of my own. So I'm really excited to be able to share some of that with all of you. So it's neat to see just from a little preliminary survey thing, a lot of people, it seems the vast majority have never used Twine at all, or those who have, not very much. So I'm going to try and cover the basics to get you started with Twine. And then I do want to sort of highlight some cool things that you can do in the future. There's a lot I want to pack into this presentation today, so I am going to be moving kind of quickly. Please feel free to slow me down if I'm going too fast, but I have put together a document that will be available for all of you to download and keep that has all the critical stuff written out, so you can always go back to that for reference. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and just do my little intro spiel here. Can everyone see my screen okay? I can't see anyone.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. All right. So Twine, what is it? Twine is an open source tool for creating interactive and non-linear stories and text-based games. When I was young, I was a big fan of like the Goosebumps choose your own adventure novels. And so Twine is a great tool for you yourself or your students, if you're a teacher, creating your own versions of those in a digital environment that makes doing so very easy. So it's a great way for students to engage with creative writing and language arts in a different way that may be much more exciting and appealing to some students who don't engage with traditional writing as readily. And it's also a great environment for an introduction to basic elements of coding. You do not need to know coding at all to make a fantastic Twine story, but with elements of coding that can be gradually introduced at your own rate and by your own interest of what you want to try and do with it. It has actually opened up a whole world of coding to me, which is something that I've never been into previously. And it can do that for students as well. So it's a great tool for both teachers as a creative medium and students. And once you get into the more advanced parts of coding as well, Twine has its own built-in coding aspects, but you can also incorporate much more universally used things like CSS and JavaScript, which are used all over the internet. So it can have you can do some very powerful things with it if you get to the more advanced stages with it. The other things that I really love about Twine, and that makes me such a proponent of it, it's open source and completely free to use, which is always nice, especially if you're trying to find something that your class can use. It does not require signing up or making an account. Again, that's a big plus when you're dealing with young students. It can be used completely online, browser-based, or offline if you know you're not going to be with reliable internet access. And the things that you make in Twine are published as HTML files. And these are the type of file that make up any web page that you look at on the internet. So essentially anything that you build in Twine is its own little self-contained web page that anything from a laptop to a tablet to a phone. If you can go on the internet, you can run a Twine project on it. So it's really good for creating things that you don't have to have your audience download a special, coding program to be able to see your creation. They can view it in a standard web browser. To use the editor to create a Twine, you do need to be on a computer, a laptop, or a desktop, but the things that you build can be accessed on mobile devices. And again, it blends flexibility of ease of use and a very shallow learning curve when you're first getting started with very powerful tools later on if you choose to dive deeper into it. So making things with Twine, it is, as I said at the start, ideal for interactive stories and non-linear stories, non-linear being usually like a choose your own adventure kind of thing. I found out recently, apparently that term is trademarked and very heavily defended. So a lot of Twine creators don't use the choose your own adventure moniker. It's also great for building text-based games. However, you can also build other games that are not strictly text-based. You can make presentations, especially interactive digital presentations, and custom educational tools and applications as well. And I'll have an example of that for you to view later. I threw in a video here just to show like this is the kind of multimedia thing that you can do with Twine. It doesn't just have to be text and pictures. So to get started, what I wanted to do was to have a chance for you to check out a few examples of things that are possible to create in Twine. So I've popped a link into the chat and it's visible on your screen as well. And this is just my blog page with 4 different Twine games and stories that I made or co-created, mostly through the MET program. So there's a big French learning educational game that I made in Jen's class for the video game creation class. So I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to just freely explore those games on that page. If you have trouble accessing any of those, just let me know in the chat or just chime in with a question. And yeah, I'd say try to check them all out if you can. You don't have to. The French Druid game is a little bit long, so you may not be able to get all the way through that. Yeah, I'll give you 10 minutes to see what's possible, and then we'll come back and talk about how to actually build some of these. So to get started with Twine, the first thing that you're going to want to do is go to twinery.org, and I'll pop that into the chat as well. But again, you don't have to follow along as we're doing this here. Once you're at twinery.org, one of the beautiful things about Twine, yes, you can download it and run it from your device, which is what I usually prefer to do. But there is a use it online feature, which it's a fully functional version of the editor that you can jump right into using without needing to download or install anything. So that's great for especially if you have restricted permissions on a classroom computer that you're using. Pardon me. First time you open it up, it'll ask you to, if you want to do a tutorial. I have a few projects loaded up already, but your initial screen will be blank once you skip past the tutorial. So this is where all your projects, which are called stories, regardless of whether it's a game or a presentation or a story, they're all called stories, will be stored. To create a new story or a new game, there's a green plus story button over on the side here. It'll ask you to name it. This is not something that shows up in the story necessarily. It's just a file name for yourself. So I'm just going to call it my story. And I'll walk you through creating a, first, just a simple choose your own adventure style story. So when we're inside our story, the first thing you'll see is a big blank page with a little white box. And this white box is called a passage. And you can think of passages in Twine as being like pages of a book or pages of a website. They are individual segments of text and code that the user can navigate between using links. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these extra ones we don't need. Your first passage, what you're going to want to do is double click that to open up the passage editor. And this is where most of our work will happen. For any given passage, we'll need to give it a title. Twine, everything in Twine is case sensitive. So I'm going to call this title of this passage start. It'll be our starting passage. I'm going to remember I'm using a capital S for this because that is important. And I'm going to start writing a bit of a story here. We're going to do a choose your own adventure story. You are lost in the woods. It is raining and very windy. You see a spooky house. All right, doing a scary story. Now, once you have written out the content of your passage in this lower part of the box, and this can be whole paragraphs of writing. I'm just going to keep it simple for the demonstration. When you exit out of a passage editor, all the changes that we've done are automatically saved. So you see this passage is now titled Start, and you can see a little preview of You Are Lost in the Woods written in there. And if we want to see what this will actually look like to our audience, because the editor view is not the same as the audience view, we're going to go ahead and press the play button down in the corner here to preview what this looks like to our reader or to our player. So Twine's default is black background, white text. There's our text. Simple one-page kind of story deal. So let's make this a choose your own adventure, and we'll add a few options. Let's say we want to try the front door or go to the backyard. Now, instead of having to write go to page 17 and go to page 25 for these options, we're going to create links. And to create a link in Twine is really, really easy. This is the one thing in the first part of the presentation that's going to look kind of code-ish, but it's so simple that it's very student-friendly if you're doing this with a classroom. All we have to do is take whatever we want our option to be for our reader or player to do. We're going to surround it in a pair of square brackets. So I'm going to do 2 square brackets open on the front and 2 square brackets closed on the back. And I'll do that on the other one here too. Go to the backyard. And when I exit out of this and those changes are saved, 2 new passages are automatically generated using the names of the text that was included in the brackets there. And so now if we hit the play button again, you can now see that that text, because we double square bracketed it, it is now a clickable link. And if we click through to that, it takes us to that next passage, which currently has nothing in it. Now we can, let's just build out a quick little mini story with this. Let's say, let's give some content to this option. We'll say the door is locked. And we'll say the yard is very messy. There is a broken window. And inside any of these passages, we can add more options. We could say, go double square brackets, look around the yard. We can say, go through the window, or we can say, go back to the front of the house. And again, for each of these strings of text that we have included the square brackets around, we're going to generate another passage with that name for each one. Now, one thing I love about Twine's editor, as you start to get more and more branching storylines, the fact that you can just click and drag these around to visually organize them in a way that makes sense for you is super handy. Again, this view is something that your player or reader of the game will not see unless they put it into Twine themselves. So whatever you want to do for your visual organization here is, if it works for you, it works. Now, what if we want to go revisit a passage again? If I want to go back to the start again, let's say, because we did have an option that said, go back to the front of the house. And let's say we just want to repeat that initial text of, oh, you're lost in the woods, you're outside of a house. We could link back to that. What was that passage called? Start with a capital S. We can link back to a passage that we've been to or that we've created before by writing its name with the double square brackets. And let's go back to the front house. All right, so actually, yeah, let's play through this and see what this looks like here. And you can see the arrow going back there too. All right, so we'll start at the beginning. We are lost in the woods, see a spooky house, try the front door, door's locked. Now, this is a bit of a dead end here. I didn't include any links out of the front door one. So there is an undo button that's part of the default Twine Harlow interface. So we can undo that choice if we want. And now we can go to the backyard, go back to the front of the house. And now we have this weird link that says start. So we have gone in a loop. We're back on the front page again. Now, what we just did there from a narrative point of view, I don't really love that we have to click on something that says start when really we want to say go back to the front of the house and then have it jump right to being in front of the house again. So the other thing that we can do for simple choose your own adventure stories to make them a little more customizable is we can do a named link where the text of the link is different from the name of the passage we're going to. So let's actually go to backyard. So let's say we want to keep this text go back to the front of the house, but we want to go to the start. What we can do is we can draw a little arrow with a dash or a minus sign and then a greater than sign. So we've created a little arrow shape there. And so we can say this text is now going to, pointing to the passage named start. And if we do that, save that, you can see, oh, we no longer have a link going to the go back to the front of the house passage. Nothing links to that anymore. So actually we can get rid of that. It's impossible to access inside the game or the story. And you'll notice our arrow is now two directional between the start and the go back to the yard passages. So we'll hit play, go to the backyard, go back to the front of the house. All right, there we are. We're back to the front of the house again. So this is all you need to make a really complex choose your own adventure story. And someone's asking in the chat, that code was, yes, a dash and then the greater than sign. And any code I use in this is included in the document, the tips and tricks document that I included on my my blog page at the beginning. So again, if you go to that page and bookmark that so you can get back to it, everything I show you here is documented there with examples, so you can always go back and reference these again. So this is great for, you can have complex webs of passages that are interconnected to each other. But the other fun thing with Twine is, with it being a digital medium, we can play around a little more with what we're doing with the text itself. We can stylize it. We can add colors. We can add different font choices. And Harlow's editor does come with some nice built-in tools for this. So there is a menu up here that I won't go into too deeply because it's pretty intuitive. But you can highlight text. You can make it bold, and it'll add the markup code for that. You can add the color palette to add a color to something. It's called flat color for whatever reason. Oh, I guess in contrast to like gradient color. So lots of rich options here in this menu. You'll notice that for some of the more advanced options, it'll pop in a little bit of code that runs to alter the text. And again, anything that's code that happens in the passage here, like those double square brackets, the code stuff kind of disappears and goes behind the scenes when we actually play the game, and all you see is the result of it. So let's add one more. Let's go to font styles because these are kind of fun. I'm going to take very windy, and if we go into styles, we can actually animate the text too, which is kind of fun. So let's maybe have it sway in the wind. So I'll press the X button, and all those changes were saved. Now, actually, one thing before we test that out, just good to mention, there is no undo button in Twine's editor. So if I want to go and try to Control Z what I just did, I cannot undo what I just did now. If I type something new and not close, I can Control Z, or was it an Apple, Command Z to get rid of it. But anytime you're making major changes, if you're worried about like breaking the code in something, or just messing up a paragraph that you've written, I highly recommend selecting your text, copying it, and you can use this new passage button down here. I rarely ever use this, but you can create a new passage unconnected to anything and just create a backup passage. I'm just going to call this start backup. Oop. So anytime wow, I cannot type today. Hello, start backup. And nothing points to start backup. So when we run the game, we won't be able to access that. But I have that there now so that when I'm messing around with my start passage, if I make a critical mistake and I break some code and I don't know how to fix it again, I can always go back and take my last saved work there. So that's just a little best practices thing that I like to do. But let's test out those text decorations we did. So we'll play that. All right, so we've got bold lost, we've got blue raining, we've got the very windy swaying. So this is really fun stuff to enhance the story and to take advantage of the fact that this is a a multi-medium or multimedia medium, I suppose, for exploring stories. We can have more than just the words themselves. Same with our transitions between when we link between different passages, it's possible to create links. If we go into the link menu here, which I ignored before, link, create a new hyperlink with this text. Let's go someplace else. Go to the passage named someplace else. And this little link creation menu that's in the editor menu here gives you some cool options to have like transitions. So maybe we can do it like a dissolve when we leave and then have the new one slide into place. And we can alter how long that transition is. Oh, get this far all the way here. So if you create a link through the link menu, you end up with some code that's a lot more complex than just the 2 square brackets. But that lets you do something cool like this. Let's go play this, go someplace else. And now we have a fade out and the new passage slide into place. So really fun stuff, especially for students to explore or for you to enhance your own stories that you're doing. Okay, question in the chat. Which version of Harlow do you recommend? I've been trying to use Sugarcube. Yes, so this is something I didn't talk about yet. Twine supports multiple different formats. I like to think of them as languages. When you open up Twine, by default, I'm going to go down to the story menu here and change format just to show. So these are all the different formats or languages that Twine is available in. And so the way that you execute coding is different between all these different versions, between Harlow and Snowman and Sugarcube. So Harlow is the default one. This is what I normally recommend just because, first of all, it is the default. It's probably the most widely used format. There's lots of support available online, lots of great examples of stories created with it. So Sugarcube is another very popular one because coding wise, it is much more powerful. I'm personally not as familiar with Sugarcube. I have one project that I'm working on with it, basically just bashing code together and trying to make it work. So I can't talk about Sugarcube too much other than it certainly can do things that Harlow cannot. But there is a steeper learning curve there, including in Sugarcube. I don't think you have the convenient text editing menu available here. In Sugarcube, all these buttons would be absent, and you're entirely dependent on your ability to type in or copy and paste code from other places. So if you are using Sugarcube, the most recent version is probably the most commonly used today because it's been out for several years, I think. So it really depends what you're trying to do though. Like I've got a current project where I borrowed some code from someone else to do a cool thing that only works in an older version of Sugarcube. So yeah, that's something I can get into maybe a little more with questions and answers. But yeah, that's a great question though. So my recommendation, stick with the default. You don't even have to know what Harlow is other than when you're Googling for help. Oops, it sometimes helps to put Harlow into the answer so you don't get answers for Sugarcube. All right, text markup. Sorry, I'm just gonna find my place in my script here again. All right, so we did simple links, we did named links, we did the links menu. So again, this is all stuff that's very accessible to students as well as beginning Twine users. The other thing that you can do is we can also do all those text decorations on links as well. So let's say we wanted to make the text for go to the backyard red. We could do that. We could select it and we can either select the whole thing or just the text inside. I think I find it usually better to do the whole thing. Flat color red. There is the one tricky thing to watch out for when you're doing text decorations on simple links like this. And actually, if we go test drive this, I'll show you what I mean. Oop, go back to the start here. Oh, I made a red background. Okay. So go to the backyard. Oh, that actually worked. That was supposed to break. Anyway, there's an error that happens sometimes where the first two brackets, because we have now triple brackets inside brackets, the first two brackets will sometimes get interpreted as the start of a link, and you'll end up with a new passage being created called open square bracket, go to the backyard. I don't know why that issue didn't pop up now, but if it does happen, now you know where to look for that. I talk about this in the document too. So the next step that a lot of people want to do is put pictures, put images into their Twine stories. So there is a little bit of code for this. Again, it's in the document. I happen to have it memorized, but you can just copy and paste it from the document. What we're going to do is we're going to do first, let's go find a picture actually. So I'm just going to I'm going to show you how to use pictures that are already on the web. We're just going to I'm going to search for spooky house, images. Pick a spooky house. Let's do this one. So get this chat window out of the way here. I'm going to right click on this image and copy link address. And I'm just going to double check it. I'm going to open a new tab, paste that address in, make sure we can actually see. Nope, that's not working there. Often you have to go right to the website itself to try and copy that. Let's do that. Copy image address. There we go. Okay. So right click on the image, copy image address. I always like to paste it into the URL bar, just make sure I can actually go to the image, because if you can't do that, it's not going to work in Twine. So we're going to use this picture. It's not ours. We're going to hot link to it. It works. It is someone else's hosting. A lot of hosting services will discourage this and actually actively break links and change the address of a link if they detect this happening a lot. So this is not a reliable way to do pictures, but it's a quick and easy way, especially if you're just doing a quick project with students. So the code that you can paste in, I'm just going to write it out. IMG for image space SRC for source. Image source equals quotation mark. I'm going to put in the address for that image that we just copied, close it off with another quotation mark. And we're going to give it a size as well. I'm going to go width equals 50%. Now, technically, we don't have to keep the width part, but I highly recommend it because otherwise you get pictures of weird sizes. And without this, sometimes you'll have something that looks fine on your computer screen, but then if you try and open it up on a mobile device or a phone, the image will be way, way too big. So this percentage is width of the screen of whatever device you're on. So it's a good way to make sure everything stays proportional. So this code here is just HTML code used for making websites. So lots of HTML works in Twine. And again, you don't have to know what this is or how it works. Just you can copy and paste it from my document and put in your own web address there. Let's save and admit someone else into the meeting here. So let's play through that and see what that looks like. We should have our picture there. There we go. You're lost in the woods. It's raining, very windy. You see spooky house, and we have a picture. So now we have a multimedia text, modified text, hyperlinks, and images for a choose your own adventure story. So this is kind of the level that if I'm doing this with students, I would probably bring things to about this level, or even without the images at first, just to give them a chance to really get used to linking and planning out the story. Because even though Twine has a very nice visual editor for sort of moving things around and planning as you go. Oh, we did get that accidental open bracket, go to the backyard link there. This, having a story that makes sense and where you're not, leaving a bunch of dead end passages where, the reader kind of gets stuck if you go there and there's no other places to go. That takes a lot of planning. And so if you're doing this with a class, I highly recommend plotting out with like cue cards first, doing lots of pre-planning to make sure that there's at least a general sense of the kind of things to watch out for. I highly, highly recommend making sure that students and yourself always do a check that any passage, unless it's like an end of the story, game over, you always want to make sure that you have a link to go either forward to somewhere else or back to somewhere else that you've been before. Because one thing, that's what I forgot to mention. Those navigation arrows on the side, the undo, redo buttons, they are absolutely undo and redo the choices that you've made buttons. So when we get into more advanced stuff like variables and tracking, whether you've taking a certain action that unlocks another passage, or having a victory condition where you have to go to a certain location or a certain passage in order to win. If you go to a passage and then use the undo button to leave it, it counts as you having not been there at all. So I typically actually like to remove these undo redo buttons, because for the player or the reader, that's not always intuitive. And I've included some code in the document for how to remove those undo redo buttons. Okay, question from the chat. Could we have access to the recording of this workshop? There is a recording being made. I believe the Edith Lando Virtual Learning Center will have that available afterwards, yes. All right. Are there any other questions at this time? I'm going to do a quick pause before getting into the next part of this workshop, which is going to get a little more into the more advanced coding and some of the cool things that that can be done at a higher level once we start getting into variables and macros and all that fun stuff. Where do we get the document? Good question. So the document is on my blog. I'll copy that address in one more time here. There we go. So right at the top of this blog page, I just put in the chat is a copy of that blog. Definitely bookmark this page. I don't think this page is publicly on my blog there. I don't think it's publicly searchable right now. I might have to go change that. And again, yeah, every bit of code, I don't expect people to remember this code or keep up with copying it down yourself. It's all in the document. One thing that's good to know about Twine, whether you're using it with a class of students, or if you're using it yourself for your own projects, if you're building something for the MET program with it, it unfortunately does not support collaboration very well. There's no way for multiple people to log into the same project and edit the same project. So the only ways to really get around that are to either export the file and email that around and have everyone add stuff in turn and then email the new version to the next person. Or what I've done in the past is have everyone start up a shared like Google Doc or Microsoft Online document or whatever, and create just a giant table that has passage name and the contents of the passage pasted in. And so everyone can kind of see what everyone else is doing, and then having one person being responsible for copying all those passage names and the content back into Twine. And that is one thing that Twine does do very well is, if I had the contents of this particular passage copied into a Word document and I created a new passage and I paste that content in, all those links that are there with the double square brackets, they get auto-generated and those connections are there. So everything will, in theory, cobble together perfectly well, so long as the passage titles are all correct, including the capitalization. The other thing that can be good for collaboration, both in your own groups or for students, just making sure that you have different roles as well. You can have one person focusing more on the story, another focusing more on the coding, someone else working on artwork a little bit more, and everyone can sort of have their hands in everything, but having some people more in charge of certain aspects just helps to make sure that there is a good division of labor there. Do Git comments work with Twine? I actually don't know. That's a good question, Paul. We will have to find out. If you want to pop that into Google, that's what I'm going to do after this. After this presentation, I'm going to go find out. Oh, and the link to the document will also be put on the Edith Lando website. Awesome. All right, so I'm going to jump ahead to some of the more advanced features of Twine and some of the stuff that made the games and stories that you saw in my examples possible. So I'm going to talk about some things called macros, variables, and hooks. Let's chat window out of the way here. So I'll start with variables. So a variable is a stand-in value that can represent a number of different changing values. It's like in math when you have like 2 plus x equals 9, then you know that x is standing in for 7 there. But then if we say, oh, x is now equal to 15, then 2 plus x is 17. So to create our variable in Twine, we're going to write something with a $sign. Anything you write with a $sign preceding it gets turned into a variable. So I'm going to go see Spooky House. My name is $name. Now, when we run this story by itself, $name, because we haven't given it a value yet, we haven't defined what X is or what $name is given the default value of 0. So we're going to need to use what's called a macro, which is a function that actually does some work for the coding to set a value for our name for our name variable. So we're going to create a little bit of code here. This is all copy and pastable from the document, but if you use it enough, you start to remember some of them. I'm going to go set, and all of our macros, they are inside parentheses. So set $name to, I'm just going to use my own name right now, James. So set $name to, inside quotation marks here, James, close parentheses. So this code will become invisible, but the value James will be applied to that macro. So if we run the story again, my name is James. So this is useful because then we can use some other code to have an option for the player to input their own name. And throughout the story, we can have $name, $name, and it'll get turned into whatever the player chooses their name to be throughout the story. Where did we go here? The other thing that we can do with variables is we can use them behind the scenes where maybe we don't print them in the text for the player to see, but we can use them to do things like track whether or not a player in a game has acquired a certain object, or we can use it to track score. So at the beginning of the game, we can say we don't have a score yet. We can go set $score to 0. And that's something that in the game here, actually, you know what? Instead of pressing play, I'm going to press test because I'm going to bring up the debug menu just so we can see what's happening behind the scenes. So in the debug menu here, you can see that $name has been set to James and $score has been set to 0. So now the game's tracking a score, even if we haven't put it on the screen. We have this value that's being tracked, and if that's important for, if we get 5 points, we win the game. We can set a condition later where it's always looking to see what our score is, and if it reaches a certain threshold, then there's a resulting action. Someone's popping some code in that's not working. So what I would say, I know actually it's a good one in the chat here. So someone's trying to put a Shutterstock image into the Twine code and it's not working. I'm noticing that this link doesn't end with any kind of a file type like .jpeg or .gif. And a lot of websites, especially file sharing services, actually make it impossible to do the right click, copy the address thing that I did earlier. I made sure to actually pre-check, before doing the presentation, that this image is one that I can do that with. So the other way to do images, I forgot to do that. Apologies. This is only my second time doing one of these Twine workshops. I'm still getting the hang of following my own script. So there is another way. I'm going to switch gears and go back to images. Another way that I actually recommend doing images that tends to be more reliable and to work better. And that is if you make your own image or if you download an image. So I'm just going to steal this one, which, for the purpose of this educational experiment. Oh, I can't even download this one, can I? Oh yeah, there it is. Save image as. So I'm going to go to my desktop. I've got a Twine presentation, examples. All right. There's a Shutterstock image there. So I'm going to download a copy of that image. What I recommend doing, instead of hot linking to the images and having a web address here, I'm just going to go rename that image to something I can remember. Examples, let's rename that to house. I think that was a JPEG, right? Yes. House.jpg. I'm just going to rename this to the file house.jpg in my image tag here. And this is not going to work right away. When I hit preview, it'll say the image is broken. Can't do it. But if I save this project to my computer, so I'm going to go publish to file. My story published to file. I've downloaded a copy. Show in folder, and I'm going to move it to the same folder where I'm going to cut that, where I just put the image, desktop, Twine, presentation, examples, paste. Sorry, a little roundabout here. So if we download a copy of our file and put it in the same folder as the images that we're using, then house.jpg will work when we launch it from the computer. And later on, if we want to share, why is that not working? That should work. All the road bumps. House.jpg. Maybe, you know what? I'm not usually using Windows devices. I wonder if this is like .jpg. I won't spend too long on this if it's not working here because I don't want to get too sidetracked from the other stuff. There we go. Okay. So, and for, original artwork too, again, if you're doing something for, with a class of students having original art being created, the method of having locally hosted files where we just have the image name and then we're running our Twine project from the file in the same folder is a much more reliable way to make sure that your images are accessible and stay accessible. You know, another web host can't change the address of those to make them disappear. And when you want to share a story this way, you can always just package all your files together into a zip folder to send that to someone. Or if you want to host it on itch.io or itch.io, I don't know how to say it, but that's where the games that you tested out were hosted. Those you will upload a zip folder containing all your folders, all your images and your story file, just like that too. Again, all that's in the document. So absolute path, yeah. And so if you wanted to do subfolders, like having an images subfolder, you could do it that way as well. All right. So getting back to the coding with variables, macros, hooks. Yes. So our where are we here? So let's go. So we can use our variables and our set macro, which sets whether or sets a value to a variable to do things like create a condition to open a secret passage. Let's say we want to have a key for that front door that's locked, hidden in the backyard. So we already have an option for you go to the backyard, you look around the yard. We haven't done anything in look around the yard yet. So let's say you find a key. And what we can do here is we can add some code for set $key to true. If you do true or false statements, you don't have to surround them with quotation marks. You can do some, all kinds of logic processes and it recognizes true and false that way. So set key to true. We need a way to get out of this passage back to the front of the house. I'll just go back to the front. Arrow sign thing, go back to the start. Come on. This drop-down menu that comes when you start typing a passage is kind of handy. And so now I'm going to run this in debug mode, or anytime actually, if you play a passage right from the little play arrow underneath it, that'll put you into test mode. So that's why you'll see this white debug menu here. So again, our image is not working because we put that to a locally hosted file and I didn't bother to download the file and run it from there. So let's go to the backyard. Let's look around the yard. And when we visit this passage in our debug menu, key is now the value true. So now we can go back to the front of the house, try the front door. Now we haven't put anything in this front door passage that changes if we have the key. So we're going to use my next favorite macro, the if macro. So we're going to go to try the front door. And let's say, okay, well, we know if, here, we're going to go if $key is not true, So we've created an if statement. And the nice thing about Twine and these macros is they have pretty natural language to them. So you can do if key is true, if key is not true. It doesn't have to be true or false too. I could have done like if key is, in my possession. And as long as I did that with the quotation marks, you can have what's called a string of text like that. It can be anything at all as the value of key. So this can be something like, set shirt to red, blue, yellow. You could have all kinds of different possibilities. Anyway, we used true. If key is not true. And then in order to tell Twine that this text here, the door is locked, is the only text that we want to have as a result of if key is not true, we're going to surround it with what's called a hook. And a hook is just a single square bracket. It's just a container. So it demonstrates the limit of how far we want this macro to go. Because now we're going to want something else down here that is not going to display if key is not true. So we've got if key is not true, door is locked. And then we're going to use if's counterpart, else. We could do if key is true as well, but I want to show off else. And actually, that's all we need, else, and a new hook. You can open the door, exclamation mark. Oops, square bracket. Okay, so I see a couple of questions. I'll run this once and I'll get to the questions here. So let's play test through this. So we try the front door, the door is locked. Oh, I forgot to put a way out. Okay, anyway, undo that. Go to the backyard, look around the yard. You found a key. Key is now true. Let's go back to the front. Let's try the door again. You can open the door now. So our if and else statement has worked successfully. In the chat, does that image code work for sound and video as well? There's separate, very similar, but slightly different code for sound in the documentation, although sound does not work terribly well. There are some hiccups with that. So I did a big thing in the documentation about that. There is a bunch of code that you can download called the Harlow audio library. If sound is very important, if you want to have background music, there's some code that you can copy and paste that will make that a lot more doable. And that's very well documented. For video, I had that YouTube link earlier. What I did was from the YouTube link, when you want to, this is a fun one that it's good to do for presentations here. Let's just grab a quick video here. From whatever video you're in, when you go to share, you want to grab the embed code, the first option here from the share menu, and you can copy and paste this iframe embed code into your Twine, and that will pop the video right into your Twine project. I hope it's not too chaotic with me jumping into the questions as they come. I just get distracted by the little red dot. If it works for everyone else, that's fine. If you'd rather me keep going, just let me know, please, and I'll get to the questions later. Because I do lose my train of thought. Yeah, so we did an if-else statement to get the, so now we have this front door passage where depending on our variables, it's locked if we don't have the key, and it's open if we do have the key. And here's where we can make secret passages that are only accessible once a condition is met. Inside this hook for the else here, since we can open the door, we can create a link inside this passage. So I'm just going to double square bracket open the door to create a new passage there. There we go. It exists now. So this is a passage that we can only get to when it's revealed inside of that hook when we have the key. Backyard, look around the yard, found the key, back to the front door. Yes, okay, so now we have this link to open the door that was not available at first. So secret passages, things that can only be accessed when conditions are met. So now we've got something that's starting to look a little more like a game. And again, the variables, we can also use them for doing things like keeping track of score. So let's say opening the door gives you a point. Let's say when we land on that open the door page, set $score to, actually, yeah, here's a fun one that you can do with math. We had score at 0 at the beginning. I'm going to go set score to it plus 1. And then I'm saying your score is $score. So you can do math functions inside of a set macro if they're numerical in nature. So we can have addition, subtraction, multiplication, and it's nice that you can just use it to refer to itself. So whatever your current score is, take it, whatever its current value is, add 1. That's the new score that we're setting it to. And actually, let's make sure we don't leave a dead end passage here. I'm just going to put a quick back to the start there. Yeah, and so very quickly, these become tangled webs of links and passages here. Start. I always habitually test run everything after making a change. I recommend doing this just because you never know when something weird creeps into your code that doesn't work the way you want. And if you catch it early, right after your change, it's easier to kind of track that bug down. Okay, we got the key, go to the front, try the front door. You can open the door. Your score is 1. Awesome. And now I've made a loop. We can go back to the start and try the front door again. We still have the key. We never got rid of it, so we can still open the door. We go there again. Oh, why is the score only 1? That's strange. Oh, you know what? I remember why, because on the start page, we had it set score to 0. That's why. Let's get rid of that. I wanted to make an infinite points loop there. That's what I was trying to demonstrate. So the set score to it plus 1, even if we never initially set score to anything, the default starting value, if you refer to a variable that hasn't shown up in the story yet, it's given the variable of 0. Backyard, look around, go to front door, open the door. Score is 1, start, open the door again, score is 2. Okay, so now we have an infinite points engine. So that is, that's variables. And again, variables, you don't have to put them into the text. You can do stuff like if, I keep going back to the wrong story here. If we've opened the door and we're inside the house, we can do like set location to inside. And then if that's important for us to have our location be inside for a condition later on, that's a variable where maybe we never write location into the script where the user or the reader sees inside, but that can be used to trigger other if or else if statements. Sorry, I'm just gonna pull up the, okay, no questions at the moment. So yeah, there are these buttons in the edit menu for hooks and variables and macros. However, I find them somewhat like they're just very overwhelming. Like if we go into macros here, you get a list of the dozens, over 100 different macros that you can click into and insert into your code. And then even then, it leaves a lot to be kind of figured out by yourself. So I don't find that to be terribly useful there. So yeah, variable name. I mean, you can pet string. So the variable one is okay. It's pretty straightforward. Set pet to dog. That works just fine. And then, yeah, again, the hook one just creates the square brackets for you. So, I mean, these really don't do a lot for you in the editing menu. I think I've used the if one before, and this is actually kind of a nice one, especially if, if you like having the walkthrough. The if macro has its own special option there, which is nice to go through. So something else that you can do, as well as the, let's go, where were we at the, try the front door, as well as the if and else statements. You can also create a longer chain. It doesn't just have to be a binary. We can also have like else dash if is a cool macro. So else if key is, let's say, broken. You can break the key somehow at some point in the game. You can no longer open the door. So you can have a long chain of like, if whatever, and then several else ifs if you have several different conditions that you want to check, and these all get checked in order going down the page. And then finally, you can have your else if the value is anything else that you can't imagine, especially if it's an open-ended thing where the player can input a value, or if it's a thing like score that can be many different values, it's always nice to have that else just in case the value of a variable ends up being something you can't predict. You can have multiple if statements on a page too. So I could have a completely unrelated one, like if, let's see, I don't know, if Tommy is hungry to eat. And so in this case, both of these if statements run totally independent of each other. You can also have macros that run inside of other macros hooks. So let's say we get the key. What do we do here? Oh yeah, so we can do if, just to make it run real quick here, if key is true. We can have a separate thing here where maybe having the key and standing at the front door gives you a it gives you a morale boost, let's say. So we can put a hook inside here and go set morale to it +1. So you can have variables and if conditions that trigger other variables to be set too. So this again can get very complex. Your imagination's the limit for how you put those together. One thing that is important to note, if I didn't say it already, anything that we're doing with numbers for variable values, you want to make sure you're not using quotation marks. If you do a quotation mark, set morale to, let's just set straight to 1. If I do this, it'll look at that and see that it's just the text number 1. It doesn't recognize it as a numerical value, and you won't be able to do any math with that. So yeah, numbers versus, it's called a string if you have the brackets around it. The other thing is this is a big one. If you are editing collaboratively using Google Docs or Word, or even just writing your prose and code in something like a Word document, your quotation marks in most word processors will get turned into stylized or slanted quotation marks, and that will break your code. So in Twine, anytime you put in a quotation mark, it's straight up and down. One thing to do if you do end up with, here, actually, let's just do a quick demo here. I'll just pop open Word and this is very nice. You see these quotation marks get stylized left and right. And if you copy and paste that in, if that was code, that would be a problem. If it's just prose, that's no problem at all. But the fix I recommend doing if you accidentally find yourself with a ton of those, let's put that into our story here. This is very nice. You can always use the find replace function. The quick find is a great feature because it lets you, when you're in a really big story, find anything that, for example, has the word key. Anything with the word key gets highlighted yellow. So it's good for finding stuff that way. And if we go into the little find option window here, I can put in that quotation mark, replace with a square quotation mark, shows me which passages that's going to happen. Replace all. Again, no undo button, so use find and replace all judiciously. But it's a good way to, that was just the left one. I think I'd have to go do the same thing with the right one. But a good way to do that if those accidentally get to your code. Now, I'm going to show a couple things for once you have a big project. I'm going to pull up the Druid's Apprentice, which was one of the example ones. This is what it looks like inside Twine. Large project, lots going on, lots of connecting arrows, hard to keep track of. There are some zoom options down the bottom here. You can actually zoom out and see the whole project at a glance with these little boxes down here. Now, play testing a project like this takes forever, especially if I'm trying to do, check some different conditional endings where depending on whether in this game, if you have certain spell scrolls that you've acquired along the way, you get a different ending than if you didn't get them all. And it takes a long time to play through that. So one thing that I highly recommend is creating yourself a quick start passage. The quick start passage is a passage that it is not connected to anything in the game. So when you're playing, you cannot get to it. But when you open it up in the editor, it's a place where you can set a bunch of variables for yourself. So in this case, I'm setting, okay, I want to give myself all the spells. You can see this was before I learned some best practices with numbers and stuff. You can, set, a player name and stuff if that comes up, just to have things in place, and then a bunch of links to any part in the story that you want to go to. So you can drop yourself in mid-story with a bunch of conditions already met. So if I start testing for my quick start, a bunch of variables have been, you can't see the debug menu. I've disabled it in this one. That code's in my document. But now I can jump to, I know this is going towards one of the endings of the story here. And I have all these spells available that are only showing up on the page right now because the variable conditions for those have been met. And that would not be possible if I just tried to go straight to that passage. Here it is here. Without having run the quick start, then stuff's missing and there's stuff going, oh, some things must have been destroyed because you don't have them anymore. So quick starts are super handy. The other thing is you start getting more and more code that is super useful to do. I'm going to go back to that quick start. All these lists of set macros and variables here, these dots on the left side are showing the line breaks. I've just done those for myself so I can, the code would work just as well if I got rid of the line breaks and had them, one end to the other, but it'd be really hard to read that. So I've split them up this way so I can read them. However, what I would normally do is that all those line breaks, even though the code, the macros itself become invisible, the line breaks don't. So this passage normally would actually look like this when I load it up, where there's a giant black space. I have to scroll all the way down to get to those links. And so if you have a lot of code on a page that the player is actually interacting with, this can be really irritating to deal with. And it took me forever to learn about curly brackets, which if you set an open curly bracket before your code and close curly bracket after your code, everything within those curly brackets gets condensed so that all those line spaces disappear. And we end up with just the visible, just the line spaces and the visible text showing up for the reader or the player. All right. So a couple times before, I'm just going to keep jumping around to some other cool stuff that's good to know about. Down in your menu from your story's name, there are a couple of bits here that I didn't get into yet. You can edit your story's JavaScript. So if you know JavaScript, this is super powerful. I do not know JavaScript. There's none in here. I definitely copied some bits of JavaScript for a couple of projects. Online, if you search for how do I do whatever in Twine, Harlow, there's a very helpful community out there of people sharing stuff. And so a few times I've looked for the answer to a problem, and the solution has been copy this JavaScript into your story. So that's where you would paste that in. There's also a style sheet. So this is CSS, which is used for all kinds of internet layout stuff. So I have a bit of code here that makes the sidebar disappear. So that's the back and forth undo, redo buttons. And then also another bit down here that gets rid of the debugger tool, which is useful, especially if you have any bugs in your program where the coding actually hits a hiccup. Even if you're in play mode, the debug menu will show up. And sometimes I've had a few false bugs. And so even in what's supposed to be a finished game in play mode, the debug menu will show up for the reader. So having these bits of code is handy. Again, it's in the documentation. You just copy and paste it into your style sheet. And that does the job for you. How are we doing for time here? Oh, we've only got 10 more minutes. I can keep going a little longer, but I don't want to go too long. Yeah, I think I might want to open it up to questions. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop into the chat or just, stop share for a second here, or just call out, go ahead and unmute. I think, there's not too many of us here. Only the one style sheet. Yeah, there's the one style sheet area, Paul, for the entire story. So it affects the whole story universally. When you load up a Twine project, it's actually, I think, treated as a single web page, a single HTML document, and then all the different passages are actually just below the hood subcomponents of that one document. So if you do want to use CSS to affect different passages differently, there is a way to do that, which, I didn't actually include that in the documentation. But if you crack open my ukulele tool, Uke Composer, that has that has how you do that. And that relies on using this tag feature, which I didn't talk about. It doesn't get used a lot, but if you tag passages with certain names, like let's say, we could do forest. We could add the forest tag to different passages and then use CSS. You can steal the code out of the Uke Composer project to change every passage tagged with forest to have the same style sheet effects, like a background or different font or whatnot. And the other thing that is cool with the tags that I'll mention real quick, actually, there's a special type of tag called header. Oh, actually, I don't want to do it on this one. Let's make a new passage. I'm going to call it header, although that's not important, but I'm going to tag it as header. And when you have a passage tagged as header, it turns it into a header, just like on a Word document, that'll appear at the top of every single document. So I'm going to write this in the body here. This is a header. Your score is $score. I'm going to do a line break because otherwise the rest of the passage's content will appear like directly after the word score. Actually, I'll have 2 line breaks. You can do this with footer as well instead of header. And now if we start the project, we have a header. This is a header, your score is 0, and that's at the top of every page we go to. Go to backyard, look around, find a key, front yard, try the front door, open the front door, score is 1. Oh, now interestingly enough, the score is not updated. Oh, I probably misspelled the score and header or something. But anyway, that's how you, you can have a header for tracking like score or hit points. Yeah, I capitalized it. Capitalization is important. Here we go.
I think your screenshot stopped sharing.
Oh my goodness. I am so sorry. That's
it's
right.
All good.
Oh, I forgot I turned that off. Thank you for letting me know.
You were very passionate though in your discussion. So thank you.
Oh goodness. All right. Anyway, I created a passage called header and I pressed, let's get rid of that. Yeah. Plus tag, call it header. And now the contents of this passage will be turned into a header at the top of every passage that you visit in your story. If you want it to only show up on certain passages or to exclude it from certain ones, that's in the documentation too. So that can be good for, having headers and footers. That can be handy. Front yard, try the front door, open the door. Now, this is what I was hoping to show too. You'll notice here when we get to this page where our score has been increased to 1, the header still says the score is 0. Because the header actually loads before the rest of the contents of this passage. So now when we advance to the next passage, this should update with our new score. There it is. But yeah, that is something that's good to know about headers. If you're tracking a variable like points or score, that'll load before the contents of this passage where that new value is actually given to the score. When you embed a game on a website, do you have to rename it index? Yes. So when I'm uploading things to itch.io or itch.io, someday I'll learn which way you're supposed to say it. And the instructions for how to do this are in the documentation. But yeah, everything that you put together in a folder images, sounds, if you're using them. The HTML file has to be called index, and that's just a condition of what itch.io needs it to be. If you're just running stuff for your own purpose, it can be called, whatever. Here's my story version 2, and that works just fine on its own. Yeah, wow, I actually got through more things than I thought I might. Any other questions questions about how certain things were done in certain games that you want to learn more about? If you're wondering about, let's see here. Tried embedding it on Wix, but said the file is too large despite zipping it. Any tips? You tried embedding the HTML file, the Twine file? Yeah, okay. Interesting, because usually these are not very large files. I wonder if, well, and the other thing is if it's a zip file, I'm not sure if, oh, that's weird, if it can't be downloaded from Wix. I wonder if that might be more of a case of it might be blocking the zip file from being uploaded. I think a lot of free web hosting services like that, just to combat like people putting up viruses and stuff, often don't like having zip files being hosted, and actually sometimes stop you from putting up raw HTML files too. So that could be more the case rather than it actually being too large. Yeah, so I would highly recommend, if you want to publicly publish your Twine stories or games, unless you have your own web hosting and are familiar and comfortable with doing that, I highly recommend itch.io. It's kind of like YouTube for video games. There are a bunch of other cool Twine stories that are available on here too. It's a whole category on here. And I've just found it's very user friendly. Once you go through their documentation, which I've linked to for my document, it's pretty straightforward to upload stuff to here. Yeah, if you're really interested, you can get to, from the games that you already checked out, you can check out my user page. It has a few other like projects that I've worked on for the MET program, some other cool examples in a couple of them that might be of interest. All right. Yeah, so I hope that was useful and not jumping over the place too much. And again, I know I was moving fast and doing a lot of stuff very rapidly, but my hope was to kind of just highlight like what's possible. And then again, the document on my blog page, which I'll pop in the chat one more time. Highly recommend bookmarking this so you can get back to it again. And it will be on the Edith Lando Center site as well. All the code that you need is in there with explanations. And again, all of the games that I've made that I provide as examples, please feel free to download a copy of those. I made sure at least the 4 that I linked to from my blog have a download option on the itch.io pages. Load those HTML files into Twine, steal my code. That's how I made half of those games too, was looking at other code that people posted in help forums and stuff. Also in the documentation, there's a link to Twine's official user guide, which has a lot of, I've learned a lot from that as well. There's just a lot there. So yeah, knowing what to look for is usually the hardest part. What is the youngest age you've had students successfully create their own Twine? Any big issues that I've noticed? So I have actually not yet run a class with students doing this. I am going to be doing that this September. So I'll have to get back to you on that one, Lexi. But I anticipate one of the biggest things will probably be brackets that are not closed or that don't close symmetrically. I keep opening up the wrong Twine project here. Especially as you start to layer, code within code. And where was that example that I did here? Try the front door. Yeah, so stuff like this here where I'm still sharing, right? Yes, good. Where I've got, set key to true and then set morale to 1. If I switch these brackets around at the end here and, square bracket and then a round bracket. That'll break that code there. And we'll end up with, yeah, no functioning code and just a lonely parenthesis there. So that's one of the things I'd probably expect to see a lot of, is that symmetry being needed. Twine's editor actually does a really useful thing. If you click on any of these parentheses, it shows you where your open and closing pairs are for any given set of brackets. You know, I can put all this inside another hook too. So this is a super handy feature, just being able to click that and see, because sometimes when you get to a large project, like, or a large batch of code, I don't know which trail. Here. So yeah, especially with lots of text decorations and stuff, just trying to see like, okay, I've got this giant hook here. It's a link hook, and then I've got another macro there, and then another hook there, and that's inside this hook, which is inside of this hook. So being able to click through that is super handy. Yeah, so that's 5 o'clock. I'm happy to answer any more questions or clarify anything else. Downloading Twine onto Macs. Max saying the developer's not verified. Yeah, I'm not sure. Oh yeah, don't be sorry. I'm not sure about the developer verification. I don't remember if I saw that when I did it. I know that I've got Twine on my MacBook. I downloaded it. Nothing's gone wrong. It's a pretty reputable development team. They've been making Twine for years. So, I'd say if you feel comfortable trusting it, go ahead. If not, the online version, the online editor is just as fully featured. The only last thing I'll say is if you are using Twine online, all of the work that you do is stored in your browser's cache. It's in your browser history. And so if you delete your browser data, or if that gets deleted by accident, or all of your work will be lost. So making a hard copy to back up all your work if you're using browser-based Twine is important to do. If you want to do that with an individual story, you can just save the story by publishing the file. If you want to take the whole archive, if you have a lot of stories and games, you can press the archive button from your menu and it'll download a zip file containing all of your work. So that is the one small advantage to the desktop version, is you don't have this, it's not common, but the slight risk of everything getting wiped out if you lose your internet history. But otherwise, I'll pull up my desktop version. Loading. There it is. And it looks and runs the exact same way. Oh, thank you, Angela, for the link there. All right, so it looks like there's some information about the unverified developer for Twine. All right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember this one. Yeah. So it's a thing where it's not letting you open it at all, even because it's unverified. I think, for new programs on Mac, sometimes you have to right click and then press open or run rather than just a double click. If that's the issue there. All right. Any more questions? Oh, not even giving you the option to download it. Okay. So hopefully that link has some solutions. It's a little outside of my expertise on this, but again, if you get stuck not being able to download it, the online version is fully featured, and other than just making sure to back up your work locally occasionally, I made most of my Twine projects on the browser-based version of Twine before ever downloading the desktop one. And sometimes I find it even a better workflow too, because you test everything, it opens in a new tab rather than switching to a whole new browser window out of the desktop client when you run tests of your game or your story. All right. So yeah, unless there are any other questions or yeah, anything else, I'm happy to stick around, but I'm not seeing anything else pop up. So I think I'll stop sharing screen here. And again, hopefully you learned something new, whether Twine is brand new to you or if you have a bit of a background with it. Hopefully there's some new stuff and that you saw a little of what's possible and have access now to explore and play around with those things.
Thank you so much for your time today, James. It was really great.
Thank you. Yeah, happy to do it. I put my email address in the document too. If people want to email me with questions, I'm happy to help. Again, there's a great online community too. And just make sure to put Harlow into the search rather than just Twine to narrow it down to the default one. So much of what I've learned is just typing, how do I do this in Harlow? And yeah, there's 95% of the times this one user named Gray Elf, who I think is a developer on it, who has all the best answers. Yeah, it's a really cool thing to get into. I've started to check out some of the other Twine creations on Itch.io, and there's it's not a big subreddit, but there's a small subreddit for Twine games too. So it's kind of become a bit of a passion of mine, and hopefully it stays of interest to some of you too. And I guess, yeah, I guess we can probably wrap it up there.
Thank you.